From medical emergencies and wildfire response to disaster preparedness, public education, and protecting one of BC's fastest growing cities, our fire and rescue teams truly have to be ready for just about anything. So how do you prepare for emergencies you hope will never happen? And what does it take to keep an entire community ready for whatever comes next? Today, we're talking about the stories behind the sirens. Not just the fire trucks you see responding to emergencies, but the people, the planning, and the partnerships working behind one of Maple Ridge's most essential services to keep our community safe. Welcome to Real Ridge, the podcast where we explore the people, projects, and ideas shaping Maple Ridge. Joining us today is Chief Dave Samson, Fire Chief for the City of Maple Ridge Fire Rescue. Chief Samson leads a diverse organization responsible for fire suppression, medical first response, technical rescue, fire prevention, public education, emergency management, and disaster preparedness. Under his leadership, the department is guided by 4 pillars: strong culture, firefighter health and wellness, community engagement, and service excellence, while ensuring Maple Ridge remains prepared for today's emergencies while planning for tomorrow's challenges. Chief Samson, welcome to the Real Ridge, and that is quite a list of things that are on your plate. Why don't we start by just introducing yourself?
Oh, thank you very much, Mayor Ruimy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so grateful to have this position to serve the community and be the chief of a department of amazing men and women. So happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm happy to have this conversation with you. And I know we talk quite often throughout the week. So this is a conversation I wanted to make sure our listeners were able to be a part of. You know, when most people think of the fire department, well, they picture firefighters responding to burning buildings. In reality, today's fire service is one of the most diverse emergency response organizations in local government. Let's start off with, what does Maple Ridge Fire and Rescue? What do they do? What's your job?
Well, I think the simplest way we can explain to the community is we respond with an all hazards response. That is the one function. That's from that emergency response level. What people don't think about is the other stuff behind the scenes. And you alluded to that with all our fire prevention and our public education and emergency preparedness. It's such a great profession to be in because no 2 days are ever the same. Yes, we have to prepare for, horrible things that happen, but really it's all about just serving the community and staying prepared for anything that could come our way. So it's quite exciting that way. And, Maple Ridge Fire Rescue has such a unique history. And for me, it's exciting to be a part of that organization when I think back to how this department was formed back in 1946, and it was all rooted in community service with a group of individuals. A horrible fire takes place in the community, some severe loss, and the community comes together to form a volunteer fire department in 1946. And we still have that original fire truck that's restored today in the fire hall, and our volunteers have done an amazing job of restoring that truck. And then the evolution of that department as it transformed from a volunteer fire department to a paid on-call department in 2001. And then ultimately in 2005 is when it transitioned to a composite model that has career firefighters that are part of the International Association of Firefighters. So just some 21 years ago, we're really still quite a newer unionized fire department.
So, there's so much to tackle here. I was just going to start off we had the Edge Street fire, and that was probably one of the most devastating fires we had here. One building completely burnt down, half a building. It was raining out. We were lucky with that. So the third building was saved. I lived 2 blocks away and we were getting firebombed. So I went out there right away from 10 o'clock till 5 o'clock in the morning watching. And this is pretty scary to see your city on fire like this. But I saw some really great things. We had firefighters there. We had trucks, we had resources, many of them from outside, from Mission, from Coquitlam. We had RCMP from different communities. We had TransLink that had buses because it was raining, so people were to shelter in place. So when I looked at that, my first impression was, wow, this is going great. Everybody's managing this. It was until later on when you debrief and you start asking questions that things come up. So can you talk about that a bit?
I'm happy to. And, all with the caveat that, as you well know, I didn't work here then. So a lot of it for me is gaining some of the historical data. What I do know is that we're so fortunate that, there was no lives lost, right, from that fire. And it very, very easily could have been. And I will credit all the firefighters that attended the scene that night for their efforts. After the fact, what that fire really did was it shone a light on how thin this fire department was stretched for a community that has grown quite rapidly. As you mentioned earlier, one of the fastest growing cities in the province, that we are now a city of over 100,000, approaching 110,000. And when we looked at our operational response, the people that we had on duty and that were available, it really was a high risk. So, the fortunate part was nobody was injured. And the other fortunate part is we were able to reflect on that and say, how do we protect our community? And so, a master plan was developed with lots of recommendations. But from those recommendations, as I came in, it's my job to say, what can we accomplish? And so we put forward an aggressive strategy to start building up our staffing levels, operational staffing levels, prevention staffing levels. And we are grateful that, this was supported by our mayor and council as a first step to protect our community.
Yeah, I remember that first increase that we gave was a 6.5% increase, where other communities were seeing double-digit increases. But in there, we authorized 16 new full-time firefighters and 12 new RCMPs to the profile. And, when I look back in history, the city hadn't hired a new full-time firefighter position since 2012. And we've grown dramatically from that. And my experience of watching that fire, what came to my mind was, I hope we don't have another fire in another part of the city. I don't know how we would manage that. And that weighs heavily on council is, you can only pull so many people from different communities to come together. And one of the best examples is the Rock Ridge fire recently. Because you had a fire and you have resources there, but there's still a whole city to protect. I'm trying to frame this, of course, but let's talk about the Rock Ridge fire.
We were thankful to get notification of that fire when we did. The fact that it didn't come in the middle of the night where it could have grown much earlier. We did get some indication from some youths that were in the area that were not part of starting it, by the way. And they did some heroic efforts to notify us and lead us into the area. But as you know, it was in an area that was very close to a residential area, about roughly 400 meters to the nearest house. And because we pay attention to the trends in terms of what's happening in our world and in our communities in terms of wildfire risks, we've been really adapting in the last 2 years with our level of training, specialized our engagements with our partner agencies like BC Wildfire Service. So we had a quick response up to that area with the appropriate equipment. We leveraged our relationships with BC Wildfire Service, also with Malcolm Knapp UBC Research Force, which we've done lots of training with them as a local business within our community that's well vested in that area of concern as well. So, that boded well for the results. It took, 7 days to put that fire out. But even at that time, we were stretched. So, we implemented some strategies of calling back resources and staff to make sure, because to your point, emergencies don't wait for another emergency to happen. So we have to have the mindset of, okay, let's manage this incident, but how are we caring for the rest of the city? That is the expectation we know of our community, of our taxpayers. And that's where that operational staffing numbers needed to be addressed. And quite frankly, we still have room to grow for that. And I'll maybe just speak a little bit to the numbers, which help people say, well, how do you know how many people you need? Fire departments across North America use NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, as a guideline, as benchmarks. So in the NFPA numbers, there's risk ratings of low, medium, and high in terms of numbers of firefighters that should be on scene in certain periods of time. So for example, a low risk is a single family dwelling, a house fire, and the recommended numbers of firefighters on scene should be 15 to 16 people in a defined period of time, 8 minutes. A medium risk is like a 3-story building, similar to the Edge Street fire or a strip mall, and the recommended numbers on scene are 26 firefighters. And then you get into the high risks, which would be like a high rise or an industrial complex, and the numbers are 43. There's not a lot of cities that can get to the 43, but that's the guideline. But at least from the low risk, that is what we're really focusing on, ensuring we get our numbers to that level.
So The only job you have is fire suppression. Is that correct?
Well, that's a bit of a softball. Thank you very much for lobbing that up. Yeah, absolutely not. For sure, the community understands the big red trucks that come down the road and respond to emergencies. And yeah, that's an exciting part of our job. And we have, a great group of women and men that do that. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in terms of fire prevention. And that's an area that hadn't been adequately addressed to our opinions prior to the adding of the 16. We did not have a prevention division. This is a good opportunity to segue into the structure of our organization. So you talked about the fighting fire. So that's what we would call our suppression division. I just spoke a little bit about our prevention division. We have a training division. We have emergency management. And then, of course, our administration. So those are all the other parts that work to support everything that we do. And it's really all focused on serving the community. So prevention, those are risk-based inspections. That's public education, emergency management. And I know you've had our emergency manager that works for us here as well, Ed. So I know he's spoke a lot about all the work that we do through emergency management. And then, of course, there's the training that is nonstop. So those are just a few of the things, and that's how we're structured.
So I know that I spent a day with the fire hall, and that was a fun experience. You made me wear all the heavy equipment and the heavy boots and everything. And it was interesting to see that every day is daily training, ongoing over and over and over. And what's the purpose of that?
Training is really the backbone of everything that we do on the suppression side. And that's probably an area that people don't understand as much when you think of things like utilization rates in terms of how often are the trucks on calls. And that's not even a correct depiction of the amount of work and preparation they are doing for fire suppression. We train every single day. The topics are varied across the board, and it's multiple times a day. Whether they're hands-on, all the grunt work that we tried to make you, sweat and pass out from hauling hose up the stairs, or it's reviewing theory and it's doing presentations and talking about ways to take care of our mental health. So the training is non-stop. And that's to meet certification levels, that's to meet legislative requirements, WorkSafe BC regulations. And as you could imagine, we are expected to be experts in so many areas. People call the fire department. So our training is literally 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I'm really proud of the effort that our people, they put into it, and they recognize the importance of it. They want to be good at their job when the community calls for help.
And of course, I think one of the most important things from your perspective, as well as mine, is the more training, the more you give your people a chance to ensure that they get home safely. And that's important to all of us. But I didn't hear you mention anything about motor vehicle accidents. When people talk about fire department, the first thing that comes to mind is they're first responders. So let's just get into that, because I think there's some misunderstandings or not realizing what that means. So what is your role as a first responder?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that a lot of it is part of, doing this profession, which I so dearly love. And I think most of the people that are in it are in the same boat. We're not looking to toot our own horn. We're just happy to be there to serve. And so it falls into that all hazards response, right? So there's an emergency, somebody calls 911. The call gets routed depending on the type of agency that's required. And for, you talked about a motor vehicle incident, that is our area of expertise where we're going to respond. I think most of the community understands, the jaws of life is a very well-known term. You got to hold them. You got to see how heavy they are.
Very heavy. Very heavy.
They're, amazing tools that we use. And looping back requires an immense amount of training and repetition. It's not something that you can just do once and be done with. It's constant training. So, our response there is a multi-agency response to a motor vehicle incident. BC Ambulance Service will respond. They're ultimately responsible for patient care. But because it's a hazardous scene, it's our responsibility. So we have to care for that patient until the scene is safe for, the paramedics to get in there. So we really work closely with them, whether we need to cut the car completely apart to extricate the patient, or whether we can get them out quickly. And as well, we have to be concerned whether the vehicle is going to catch on fire, when it's leaking any fluids that are going to harm the environment. And then, the complicated part is, we may get into it later, is the technology of things. is, vehicles are changing. So the technology is changing, which presents hazards to our firefighters. And I'll just expand on that a little bit because you touched on that earlier with making sure that our firefighters go home at the end of every shift. And that is ultimately our focus. And, you spoke to the 4 pillars, and that's how I try to lead this department, is using that 4-pillar approach to be aligned with yours and council's strategic goals. But that health and wellness portion, it's vital. We have to take care of our firefighters in order for them to take care of the community.
When we talk about, you're out on motor vehicle, but you also respond to medical calls. And that's something I want to just get into very quickly because, most people recognize that you're not transporting anybody to the hospital. That is not your mandate. I don't even think you can transport anybody to the hospital. So why be the first responder to a medical call?
Well, what we take pride in the fire service as part of a municipal local government is we're here to take care of our community on their worst days. And when somebody is calling 911, we want to be part of that solution if we have the resources available. So there is a protocol set up, and I won't bore everybody with the details of how that works, but when people call 911 and request an ambulance, it goes through their protocol, and Emergency Health Services, BC Emergency Health Services, will determine whether they require the local fire department to attend. A lot of that is based on the severity of the call. It also depends on their availability. So we are trained in different licenses through the licensing board as first responders. We've recently kind of gone off on a little bit of a tangent here. But in 2019, the Office of the Auditor General wrote a report, that said there must be collaboration between the Ministry of Health, BC Emergency Health Services, and local fire departments. I'm fortunate enough to sit on that committee, that provincial committee, and represent the metro urban fire departments in the province. But it's really about finding solutions to how can we care for the one patient. So that's how we respond as first responders to provide a level of care. One of the outcomes that came out of that was that because we are often first on scene and dealing with patients, we needed to increase our scope of practice. So the licensing board, this was all approved through the province, increased our scope of practice. So in 2024, 2025, here at Maple Ridge Fire, we trained all our firefighters up to the proper scope of practice. So all our firefighters are licensed at that level and can provide that higher level of care until BC Ambulance Emergency Health Services takes over patient care.
I think that's so important because, sometimes the ambulance service doesn't have enough ambulances out there or they're on other calls. And being that first responder, the person who's called for their mom, their grandma, their grandpa, whatever, and they're having a heart attack or they fell down, they broke a leg, they broke a hip. They really don't care about the jurisdictional issues. They don't care about any of that. They just want somebody to be there and tell them it's okay. How important is that?
Well, from my experience in the years of the service, we do receive a lot of feedback after the fact that is positive if people appreciate the support and care that they get. I just recently received an email yesterday, the day before perhaps, from a citizen who informed me that, her husband had recently passed away, had Parkinson's, but had called the fire department multiple times due to his falls and his medical issues. And she was so appreciative, and her exact words were, if it wasn't for the support that she got from, Maple Ridge Fire Rescue attending and helping her, she would not have been able to keep her husband at home where he eventually passed, but that was obviously important to her. So that feels good to know that we provided that level of service to the community. And having said that, we do realize that it stretches our resources thin, which is why when we increased our operational staffing with that initial lift of 16, part of that plan was to increase the numbers that are on duty 24/7. At Fire Hall 1, which is a very busy fire station, at the time it was over 3,500 calls a year. And if you follow the fire underwriter survey rating, it says that anytime you have more than 2,500 runs for one engine company, you need to increase your resources. So we did. And we added a second due crew operating out of Fire Station 1. Now, you often see them racing around in our Ford Lightning, our electric vehicle, Squad 1. But that is not the only vehicle that crew of 2 responds to. They are not just there for medical emergencies. If we have a structure fire, they will respond in a different vehicle. If it's a known entrapment for a motor vehicle incident, they will jump on a rescue truck. If it's a fire in a non-hydrant area, they will respond on a water tender. So there's a multitude of response that they can do. But having said that, if it is a medical emergency that can be managed by a 2-person crew, they are going to respond and maintain. We still have that crew of 4 ready to serve the community for firefighting purposes.
Yeah, and I bring it up because, and I'll share this, there was an incident that happened which led to me having a heart attack. And there was so much traffic everywhere. We weren't far from Fire Hall 3, I believe. And so we just made the decision to go straight to the fire hall because we'd be sitting in traffic. And sure enough, when I got there, I was indeed having a heart attack, and it took another 40 minutes for the ambulance to come. But in the time that I was there with my partner, they didn't do much because they were limited. But what they did was calm everybody down, and I think that was so important because knowing that somebody was there going, that's okay, you're good, you got this, calmed myself down, which lowered my heart response. And that to me was so important because without that, you'd be panicking and freaking out and making things even worse. So for me, what they did, I can go as far as to say they probably saved my life. So when I look at things like that, and then I look at a growing city and how much we've grown, and I look at the resources that we have, and we've already talked about, additional firefighters, and I know that you're still hiring additional firefighters because they retire too. So you've got to make sure you keep up that proper level. But let's talk about, you mentioned the equipment part of it, the jaws of life and what have you, but there's so much more than that. Are you fully equipped to handle most emergencies now?
Well, first I have to say I'm thankful that we took care of you and were able to save your life.
Me too.
And, just finishing up on that, the crew, I'm assuming, would have provided you with oxygen therapy. They would have been monitoring your vitals. And they would have been ready in case things did go sideways. They would have had an AED there if required. They could have performed CPR, all those things. So that's the level of training that our firefighters get. So back to your question about equipment, it's ever evolving. And I alluded to it a little bit with the wildland. We have seen a significant change over the years, and we've seen it in our partners. When I speak to people in CAL FIRE or Oregon State, and we see the trends happening of the wildfires that are not just in forested areas, that are now encroaching on urban areas, it's changing. So we have pivoted. We've looked at how do we need to adjust what we're doing now to what's currently happening. So we're constantly analyzing what we're doing. One of the things, we had a vehicle replacement for a rescue vehicle. And so we made the decision to replace that with a wildland unit. So that, wildland truck should be here in a few weeks. It's here in the province. It's getting upfitted right now. We'll be excited to get it here. But that's going to be a great piece of equipment to serve our community, to get into areas where a big fire truck cannot, and help protect our community. We've pivoted by adding PPE that is wildland specific for our firefighters because we're seeing these trends. We look at emerging technologies and adjust. So, I'm very, very proud of the staff that we have that are invested in staying on top of things, that are involved in provincial level committees to know what the best practices are for keeping our community safe.
And I looked at that wildland truck. It doesn't seem like much on the surface, but when you actually start looking at the details of it, and then you think of the Rock Ridge fire, where it's hard to get to the fire itself, here you got this vehicle that can be off-road and has a water cannon on the hood. So you got your joystick and you can just spray out, wherever you need to spray it out. And I think that's the technologies that we need today. And people forget that Maple Ridge has 500 kilometers of road network. We have urban, we've got suburban, and we've got rural. That's a lot of coverage that we need. So when we look at the equipment, and yes, we need the firefighters are absolutely important, but we also need to make sure that we're keeping up to date with the equipment. A pumper truck these days can cost you $2 million. And if you're sending it to every single, first responder call that you get, then you got wear and tear on that vehicle. So adding the F-150 electric Squad 1 really helps to reduce the wear and tear on such a expensive vehicle. So I think we need to continue doing that. I know when I spent a day at your hall, we went to the training center and they were testing a new hose. You think, what's a hose? It's a water hose. What do you need to test here? But it was a company that sent it up and saying, hey, here's a hose that is lighter and we want you to test it out. Like, how important is something as simple as that?
Yeah, I mean, if you stop and think about a lot of our equipment, you can't get much more important than life safety, right? How is something going to function in the most extreme conditions possible? You know, the life safety of our civilians and the life safety of our firefighters. So we need to put things through rigorous testing, whether it's our personal protective equipment, whether it's the fire hoses, whether it's the nozzles, all the different pieces of equipment. We need to know that they're going to survive. It's been well known in our industry that, you know, the fire service, if you put 3 steel balls in a fire hall, that we'd have the ability to break one, to lose one, and to eat one.
I didn't know that.
You know, so we're tough on gear because we train really hard and we need things to function, like I say, in the most extreme conditions possible.
And the gear that you currently have is not lifelong. They expire.
Exactly. And so that was one of the things that as we modernize our fire department here in the city is we're developing plans to say, you know, an asset management plan. Let's take a look at what is the plan to replace this heavy equipment. We know what the expected life of it is. Let's start budgeting for it and planning for it, not just waiting for things to break and then looking to do things. So, and that's in line with that. We're a city of over 100,000, you know, similar to our staffing model. And, you know, I have so much respect for the people that started this department back in 1946, the volunteers and the paid on-call firefighters that just wanted to serve the community. Like, there's really nothing greater than what they were willing to do. In today's day and age, it is a struggle for people to expect people to leave their day jobs, for one, just to say, I have to go because my pager went off. That's a challenge. And the second part of that is how long the time lag that will take, if they can. So, you know, we see times where we get response from our paid on call firefighters, and we're so appreciative of the commitment that they give to the community and the training. But there's times we understand that they can't make it. And that's a challenge to run an emergency service to serve our community that expects when they call that we're there. And, you know, I'll just speak a little bit to the time lag. There's data and terminology that we use in the fire service for legacy fire construction. And Underwriters Laboratories did testing quite some time ago where they built basically a living room and then lit the corner of a garbage can on fire. And how long did it take for the entire room to what we call flashover, where every single thing in the room is on fire from the ceiling down, all the products of combustion, and you get, you know, this flashover effect. And then the time period was 29 minutes. So that's legacy construction. And in modern construction, where almost everything, including everything in this podcast room, is built out of petroleum products and plastics, right? That exact same room with the same fire lit, the time for flashover was 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So we want to talk about that minutes matter in terms of life safety, of saying, well, we'll just get people to respond from their job and come in and get on the truck. The community needs people there, and they need them there quickly because of those fire propagation numbers.
And what I'm really impressed with is the ongoing commitment for recruitment, because it doesn't start with, okay, I want to go out and hire a firefighter, because you train them yourself in a lot of cases. You can get transfers from other departments, of course, but you start off with the youth academy, you know, and those are amazing to see, these young kids that are out there trying to, hey, maybe this is a career for them. Maybe this is just a new experience for them. But some of them actually end up joining the department. And let's talk quickly about that. Why do we do it? And what's the makeup? What do they look like today?
You would have noticed sitting across the table, it just brought a big smile to my face when I think of our youth academy. And, you know, when I came here to work in this city, you know, I learned about the youth academy, and I was blown away that it's been running for over 30 years. And really the story hadn't gotten told. So, you know, we've just recently got engaged with this communications department to say, let's tell the story, because it is such a good story. You know, we engage with the school district. Applications are out there, and we're seeing just a really increased interest in applicants. So not everybody gets in. We only have the capacity to have 16 in. We try and make sure that we have a really diverse group from multiple schools, from male and female, and people that are interested. And we teach them about teamwork. We teach them about discipline. We teach them about commitment. Now, we know, of course, we believe that the fire service is the best industry, and yeah, we're ultimately trying to recruit them. But we know that not every single one of them is going to want a career. So we've engaged with other departments within the city. Our HR department gets involved and teaches them how to build a resume, how to prepare for an interview. But when we do have the stories of the people that started as a youth academy and then became paid on-call firefighters in Maple Ridge and then a career firefighter in Maple Ridge or in other Metro Vancouver departments, it's such a good story and a connection. So we're really proud of that program.
Are we seeing more women in the service?
Yeah, it's amazing. We have a very, very diverse group of firefighters that are our career and our paid on-call firefighters. And I love it because, it makes us stronger. It makes us a better department. And simple things like fire hall tours. And when those fire hall tours were out at an incident and they see female firefighter, getting out of the driver's seat of a giant ladder truck or dragging a hose. They see it so they know they can be it, right? That's the saying. And, so our diverse group of firefighters is awesome for a multitude of reasons.
It's exciting to set the example for others to follow that you can literally do whatever you want for these young people. So it gives them an opportunity to try new and different things. And yeah, if they become paid on calls, then that's even better. The more you have paid on calls, the more that can respond to different calls. And I know that we have helped other communities. We've sent vehicles and trucks and people down to other communities to help them, but also making sure that we have enough to take care of our city. We talked about wildfires and climate-related emergencies, but always a controversial one is the opioid crisis. So what can you talk about with that?
Yeah, I think the toughest thing about this is that, it's really across North America. Certainly in Metro Vancouver, every single city is experiencing the same challenges. And I think of how many people have been trying to address the problem, and we haven't solved the problem. And I know there's a lot of intelligent people that have put efforts in and will continue to. First and foremost, we treat everybody the same. Anybody, it's our citizen, whether they live here, whether they're passing through, we're here to serve them. So I'm really proud of our firefighters and the level of compassion and empathy that when they respond to the individuals. And it is a crisis. It's been deemed a crisis. It's challenging to see. We know that these are humans. These are people's kids. These are brothers and sisters and relatives that are having, problems, addiction problems, mental health challenges. And then it is a strain on our firefighters when they respond to the same individual 3 to 7 times a day for an overdose. That's hard on our people as well. So I'm empathetic for our first responders as well as the citizens that we respond to.
So when a call comes in, typically it'll say structural fire or say a motor vehicle accident. But we have a different category, which is medical emergencies. So when a call comes in for medical emergencies, do you know what you're going into at that point when the call comes in?
Well, it's obviously based on as much information as the caller provides, through to our dispatch provider. And then that information comes, through a radio transmission, but also through a terminal. So all the notes that we have, and they'll be updated on the way. So, it'll have say things that the person is, if it's a medical call, whether their status, their breathing status is, what type of a call, whether it's a cardiac emergency, whether it's an overdose, whether it's a fall, whether it's an industrial accident. So that does help the crew, one, determine which apparatus needs to respond based on the intel that we receive. We'll determine that. So it's not just, hey, take a guess. We have very defined parameters. And then it helps prepare the crew that's responding to know what they may need to do and then have to adapt once they arrive on scene.
I bring that up because I think it's important for our listeners to understand that the calls you go out on are so different. It could be a motor vehicle, it could be a fire, it could be a medical emergency. How many calls did you guys go out in 2025?
2025, as a total over the year, we were just over 7,000. 7,200 calls was our total call volume for 2025. So we've seen a steady increase ever since, except for, the COVID year was the one blip. But other than that, it's been a steady increase, as you noted, from going back to 2012, a climb all the way up.
So, Chief Samson, we've spoken a lot about climate-related issues, motor vehicle accidents, medical emergencies. But we are such a large community geographically, 500 kilometers. We have some of the best parks around, but one we don't really always call out is Golden Ears Park, the provincial park. Do we respond to calls there?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Mayor Ruimy. So, yeah, as you know, it's one of, if not the biggest provincial parks in the province. It might be the busiest. I believe it's somewhere upward of about 600,000 visitors a year attend there. So as you could imagine, that many people combined with all the fun activities that people get to do out there, it does put a significant impact on emergency resources. We respond regularly to water-related rescues up at the falls area in Gold Creek. Those are complex emergencies that take a significant amount of resources and time. There's big challenges with regards to communications out there. As you know, there's a very limited communication ability out there, and it's quite a ways out there. So we do respond there. We obviously partner with search and rescue, with RCMP, with BC Emergency Health Services, and of course, park staff. But lots of the time, we are the first ones there, and we get up there with some specialized swift water training, motor vehicle incidents, medical emergencies, or issues on the lake. So, and then of course we have the wildfire risks that scare us and that one road out, so we're really hoping that we can get, some access. I know that the city is working with the province on getting a bridge construction, which is long overdue for a park of that size with that amount of volume.
Well, if it scares you, it keeps me up late at night. It's one glance around and you see towns that are being evacuated. I mean, the one that always comes to mind is the Fort McMurray fire. Their population is very similar to ours, and the entire city had to be evacuated. And it was actually, thankfully, it went smooth because the road access was actually pretty good. Some areas, our road access is not the greatest, and this is what happens when you build a city on the fly and you're not necessarily following the right plans and procedures. So it does create some challenges to play catch up and figure out how do we get in and out of there, because it is a bit of a challenge. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely important, and other challenges that we look at is, we know that there's lots of pressure from the province on local government to increase housing stock. But once again, the issues of life safety need to be addressed. So when we look at, small scale multi-unit housing, it's proximity of buildings close to each other. That's addressing issues. That's adequate water supply. All these things put a strain on emergency services and increase the risk to the rest of the community. We often talk about technology outpaces life safety when we look at how much has really accelerated in the world of rechargeable batteries, whether that's e-bikes or e-cars, technology for the safety of these things when they do catch on fire. So it's always putting a strain, but always ready to rise to the challenge to take care of our community.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I can't imagine 7,200 calls in a year not having the right amount of firefighters available. The stress and the strain on not only their well-being, because the stuff they see can be not nice, but that's a lot of calls a day. And if we're not prepared, it could easily affect other parts of our community by not being able to respond. So when I look at, of those 7,200 calls, 600 of them were fire, right? That's pretty shocking. The amount of medical emergencies are motor vehicle accidents. They're more than fires. So that just tells me how much the fire department has changed and what the requirement, much like police officers today. 20 years ago, you're out there, you're enforcing, you're giving tickets. That's pretty much it. Today, RCMP on the street are dealing with the same issues you're dealing with. Mental health, addictions, ODs, but also dealing with crime. So everything has changed as we continue to grow. And that is a sign that any growing city will go through. So the question then becomes, how do you mitigate some of that? How do you help reduce some of those challenges? And I know that you go out on preventive maintenance. And maybe just quickly touch upon that and why that's so important.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots to unpack there, with regards to all the variety of call volume. That goes back to why our training is nonstop, because we don't just have one type of aspect that we do in our job every day. So we train on absolutely everything that's possible. And we didn't even get into some of the more complex types of emergencies that we respond to, and we can get into that. And, with regards to preventative stuff. So, we do through some new legislation of the Fire Safety Act. We do risk-based inspections. We are in the midst of determining the risk level of each type of occupancy and the frequencies required to do inspections. So we'll do those fire inspections from a prevention standpoint. And then the other thing that's really we're happy to have done now that we have a prevention division is public education events. So public education isn't just about going out and saying hi and showing off a shiny red fire truck, right? This is about teaching not only kids, but, other people in the community, different groups that will teach fire education on how to be safe. So we have an entire program, and super proud of the team that's done that. We did, I think it was like 63 different events last year where we provided public education to people, because that is the best way to mitigate fires, is to not have fires, for sure. So that's an area that we really are focusing our resources on. So if we see numbers of our statistics of fires going down, well, that means that what we're doing is working, that the investment on the right end of the problem is going to help the situation. So that's that fulsome approach that we take.
We talked about climate-related issues. I think sometimes people don't understand the magnitude of that. When you have older apartments, for instance, and it's hot, and everybody goes out and buys an air conditioner, and then the entire building starts to overload, that can start a fire in and of itself. This is the new reality that we face here. So, earlier we talked about your 4-pillar leadership approach. Maybe if you have something new you want to jump in on that one.
The one thing that I am a big believer in, and it's listed it as the first one, it's a strong culture. And I'm a big believer that, you could have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have the culture, you're not going to be successful. So, I really build a strong focus on that. And it's easy just to say those words, but what it has to be backed up with, from my perspective, is with your staff, with your team, you have to establish the vision. Explain, where are we going and how do you fit into that plan? Why are we doing that? It's so important to share that with people. Lay out the expectations to the firefighters. Be completely transparent in why we're doing things and how we're doing things, and hold people accountable. That's another area that, it's so important to do that. And then we make sure that we recognize areas of success and we celebrate those things. Then I spoke about earlier, a really strong, diverse workforce, and that will really ensure that we have a strong culture. The health and wellness of, the firefighters' health and wellness is imperative to me. And I spoke about it earlier, that we need to take care of our people so that they can serve the community. And that's a magnitude of things. We realize that our profession does have higher risks. WorkSafe BC now has 26 presumptions that are strictly related to the firefighting profession. It's not great news that that's there, that 24 of those 26 are cancers that we have a higher risk of. Cardiac events is another. And then, of course, psychological injuries based on the type of exposures. So what do we do about that? So we don't just look at those stats and run with our hands in the air screaming. We need to be proactive. And so we've taken proactive measures, right, where we're doing occupational awareness training in the fire halls to understand the impacts of the calls and how we can establish peer support teams and get psychological support as part of our, regular care, and treat our mental health like our dental health is another little expression that I like to use. And I'll share another story because I have permission to share this story. We recently did some cancer screenings. And we're being proactive. So recently, and the public may not be aware, but the Firefighters Health Act has just come into play, and it'll be reaching royal assent soon enough, we're assuming. But we're already ahead of that game. And part of that Firefighter Health Act is that employers must provide cancer screening because of the extreme risk. We recently just did some ultrasound testing for our people. We had a firefighter who was symptom-free, asymptomatic, no issues, discovered that he had a tumor in an area of his body. They did surgery to remove it. It turned out it was actually cancerous. Hopefully everything is going to work out fine. That would not have been discovered had we not taken that proactive approach. So those are some of the things that kind of fall into that pillar.
I think that's so important because I don't think people necessarily understand the risk to firefighters. Because when you're going into a burning building or you're even outside putting the fire out and you got smoke everywhere, you're inhaling a lot of that stuff. And from the older buildings, that could be asbestos, it could be numerous things. And, if we're not paying attention to that, then again, we're not paying attention to the health of our firefighters. But you also do advocacy, and I might put you on the spot with this one. About a year and a half ago, the province came up with new specs, new designs for buildings to have one exit per floor. And you, as well as a lot of fire chiefs, were vocally against that. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. And I'm so fortunate to, be part of a collaborative group, the Greater Vancouver Fire Chiefs Association. And I also sit on the board with the Fire Chiefs Association at BC. So, those are just little sidebars to show how Maple Ridge is really getting in the game, so to speak, being involved at a higher level and not just being insular in our approach. And with the single egress stairs topic, our issue was really the lack of engagement. We understand that there may be alternative solutions to things, but we wanted to be a part of it. A lot of the times we find that whether it's technology or building construction, the life safety aspect of things are thought of afterwards, and things are designed to be in a perfect state. And we find them not in a perfect state, right? After people have lived in a building for a certain long time, are they storing their scooters at the base of stairwells and plugged in with non-compliant charger systems that cause fires? So it was really, and I believe you were probably referring to when we came and did a presentation to Metro Vancouver, is educating people on how we do things. And I think the simplest way to describe the facts are, if we're talking about call it a 3-story building that has one stairwell, that's where we stretch the hose. That's where we're going to attack the fire. We're going to be operating in there. That's the only way for people to get out. So although that stairwell may be designed wider, it's not going to work very well when we're in there with our SCBAs on to protect ourselves, because it's a smoke-filled environment, because we've now opened the door to the fire floor, so to speak, and are stretching hose lines, and civilians are trying to get out. So that was why we really worked hard. And we partnered with the BC Professional Firefighters Association as well. So it was an area where both union and management were aligned.
I bring it up because you are the experts. And if the experts aren't being consulted, it does give pause, right? I know as mayor, I don't go into the fire hall and tell you how to run your training or tell you how to do anything in the fire hall. I know we sit back and we say, hey, this is our expectation. What do you need to execute that? What's missing from the plan? And that's where I want to get into looking ahead. What does this picture look like? We're likely going to surpass 110,000. We've hired now, I think, a total of 20 firefighters full-time, roughly, and you have some replacements from people who are retiring. You've got some long-term people that have been there, and their careers have been really amazing. But what's next? What's missing? What do we need to do? What does the future hold for this growth and looking to 2040 for another 25,000 population?
Yeah, thank you for that. This is the exciting part of the job. As much as I, miss riding on the fire trucks and doing all the really cool stuff, but getting into the strategic thinking and planning for the future. And you said it, this isn't a surprise. We know where our housing targets need to be. We have the projections. We know we're working on official community plans. We know we have bus rapid transit, the low heat transit corridor. We're going to have densification. The city is going to grow. I've experienced that in another city. You have these booms. So we know what's coming. And that allows us the opportunity to plan, to say, we know this is coming. What does that look like? So for example, we needed to replace Fire Hall 3 with a newer building. Is the current location the best location? We determined no, it's not, based on where the city was going to be shaped. So we've identified a new location and we're building a new protective services building that's closer to the core of town. As we expand and look at industrial lands and where the city is planning on, trying to increase our tax base by getting industry and commercial, we realize that, hey, what else we're going to need? We're going to need fire service, because that's going to actually reduce their insurance costs. Well, that's going to actually draw businesses out here. So let's start identifying where we are going to place the land for an additional fire hall. We know the numbers that we need to get to in terms of operational response. When we benchmark and look at cities of our size, we have to get there. But we know that there's challenges. There's only so much tax money to get there. But we have the plans in place to get there, to grow, and to continue to expand so that we can serve the community. Because as I mentioned a few times now, emergencies don't wait for one emergency to end. So we need to make sure that we have the resources available to respond with concurrent emergencies.
I think I say this on every podcast. We could go on for another 2 hours, but I'm going to leave you a couple of minutes to say that if you could leave every resident with one message about emergency preparedness and community safety, what would that be?
Overarching, I guess I would want them to know that we're here. Maple Ridge Fire Rescue and all of our divisions are here to serve the community. And I've said it a few times here. I'm so proud of the men and the women that wear the uniform, whether they're career or paid on-call firefighters, emergency management, administration, really have a true sense of serving the community. The work that we've done in emergency preparedness, very, very proud of. I would tell the community to continue to stay in touch with how our messaging, how to be prepared. When bad stuff happens, yes, we're going to respond, but you have to be able to do your part. Right? So everybody has to do their part. Be prepared. Follow the stuff that we talk about from emergency preparedness, those types of things. And then just really staying engaged with us. Community engagement is another one of the pillars that I speak of. I'm super proud of the charitable work that our people do. This is all they do on their time off. I believe last year we raised close to $85,000 for different charities through our charitable society because we're so invested in our community. Our women and men care about the community. I think it's important that people know that we're there for them.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you brought up the charitable work because they do amazing work, whether it be standing in front of a store with the boot or doing the car wash in the summertime. They're out there, and you're right. They're on their own time, and this is because they care about what they're doing. So today's conversation really reminds us that fire and rescue is much, much more than responding when something goes wrong. It's about preparing before emergencies happen, investing in people, building strong partnerships, and planning for a growing community. Whether responding to a medical emergency or preparing for wildfire season, which we're at right now, coordinating a regional disaster response or educating families about fire safety, the work happening every day often goes unseen. But that's the work that's so critical to any growing community because it touches every resident. So I want to say a huge thank you to Chief Dave Samson for joining us today and for sharing the work being done to keep Maple Ridge safe, resilient, and for whatever comes next. Chief, if you could give our residents a call to action, what would that be?
I would want them just to learn more about all of our resources and emergency preparedness. And they can do that at mapleridge.ca/fire safety. Test your smoke alarms, create a home escape plan, build or refresh your household emergency kit, and sign up for city emergency alerts and stay informed through official city channels.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us today, Chief. Always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.